Hey guys, it's Mike here, and as I've talked about many times on my channel, my favorite arc of Dragon Ball Z and the Dragon Ball manga is the Cell Saga. And every single time I go back and I reread or rewatch it, I always question one particular aspect of it, which is when exactly did Dr. Gero start to create Cell, the titular villain of the arc? After all, there's a lot of different information we're given over the course of the story about when exactly he might have started and what his plans may have been for Cell with regard to the androids, particularly 17 and 18. So let's get into that right now as I open up the manga and I show you guys an idea of, well, I guess we'll have to see. With regard to Dr. Gero's android ABCs, as this is often referred to, Toriyama gave us a kind of little layout of the androids and the order in which they were created by Gero. As you'll see, this isn't exactly 100% in line with, well, when he might have started working on Cell. So we have Gero back before he was 20, much older than that, of course, where he created androids 1 through 7, all defective, Android 8, who we meet in the original Red Ribbon Army saga of the series, then 9 through 15, each defective, but the ones from the movie, 13, 14, 15, were pretty close to perfection. I guess maybe he didn't like the fact that 13 was, a trucker who hated $40 haircuts and so on. But 16, he was considered a failure, but it could be because of the fact that he just made that up as an excuse so that he can continue to meddle with him and not really release him as a killing machine, as Shinzo Ningen, as Black and Fist would say, because of the fact that, well, he was modeled after his son, as Toriyama would later tell us, and then it would be added to the current continuity of Dragon Ball Super, at least, with regard to that storyline. Now, interestingly, we get after him the bio-androids, essentially the human-based androids, 17 and 18. Each of them also seen as failures up until 19 and 20, where 19 was deemed a success because the fact, of course, 19 obeyed Gero. For the most part, you can argue him running away from Gero later wasn't really obeying, and he also was the one who did the surgery on Gero to transplant his brain into 20, who of course he naturally would see as being a success. Now, interestingly, as you can see right here, we have the arrow that points between Cell and 17 and 18. However, he's not named Android 19 or BioAndroid 19. He isn't even named Android 21. That would be, the one based off of Gero's wife at the time. Or perhaps the, that's going into different branching realities and such. So either way, with Cell, the question is, when was he designed, and also when was he beginning to be implemented? So we see, for instance, in the manga, a little bit later on in the story, when Trunks and Krillin go into the secret bunker that they learn about from Cell through Piccolo. This is where they see Dr. Gero's computer, who handles most of the creation of Cell himself after the computer is put into its basically autonomous mode, collecting the various cells and then creating him in this incubation pod. We see him as his little amoeba sort of self, his little, gestation stage version of his being, even before the egg and before the large larval state, as it were, the cicada looking form. This is when eventually they destroy him. Now, in the manga, it's a little bit more ambiguous as to who really destroyed him. We can argue maybe it was Krillin, although you could say that perhaps the different wires over here were in fact from the computer, and that Trunks is the one who actually killed him. It's left up in the air. I could see it being either way, so you can contribute this to Krillin or Trunks. Now, in terms of Cell, he gives a little bit of insight as to how long it took him to develop, and also when those cells were being collected. Now, of course, we get this breakdown as well of the different stages of him when he's introduced and when he's battling against Piccolo. I love this art that Toriyama created here. This leads into Cell sucking Piccolo's arm and making it to where what happens, he makes it to where he thinks that Piccolo is defeated. And so he begins to monologue like a Bond villain, telling him just about everything that he needs to know so that Toriyama can explain this brand new villain that just appeared, who'd always been there, trust me guys, and definitely didn't arrive from interference from Toriyama's former editor, which, to be fair, he just took his advice because he wasn't working with him at the time, but he respected him so much that it led to him creating the perfect villain, and probably his best design as far as I'm concerned. It looks amazing. Although Toriyama didn't really like to draw it because of all the spots, which I don't blame him. It would be really hard to do that. So with that being said, he begins to explain that once upon a time, Dr. Gero collected cells from the greatest of fighters and began conducting research on artificial humans who could be synthesized from those cells. Due to the sheer amount of time required for the task, he gave up on it midway through, leaving his computer behind to continue his work for him. Now, this is a common theme. It took a very long time, decades, for Cell to finish being, well, essentially gestated, as you could see right here. At this point in the story, this is after the androids 17 and 18 arrive, but when did this actually begin to be implemented? It's interesting that Cell eventually goes on to say it would take about 24 years for him to eventually emerge from the chamber, as you could see where he says that right up here in the top left. Now, with that being said, additionally, he explains when the cells were collected. Now, this could be a very important part. The cells started to be collected using the spy bots from the computer during the Cell Saga, for instance. Well, actually, way before that. This is when it was retconned in. It was during the Saiyan Saga. As you can see, Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, Goku, and then eventually the final ones that we see that are collected, with them being Frieza and his father. He makes note of the fact that they could have collected Trunks' cells, but they believe they already had enough Saiyans involved. Now, a lot of people could see this as a plot hole, or they might even think that perhaps this is something that suggests that there was another Trunks who killed the King Cold Frieza in Cell's timeline. However, the more that I've read this over the years, the more I think it's actually more of a false equivalency. We just so happen to see these two here, but Cell never says that this is what happened in his timeline. Instead, we see that Piccolo is thinking about this when Cell is explaining everything, and for all we know, this is just Piccolo imagining what happened, because of course, this is essentially the version of the story that he saw, and also what the audience saw. Toriyama wasn't going to go and draw an anime, essentially, Goku killing them, and also, he'd already been talking about Trunks, how he killed him, went back in time, so you could definitely make an argument that that's just us conflating that Trunks did this in Cell's timeline, when in fact he's just explaining how they were killed after they showed up on Earth, and it's a whole other can of worms I might discuss in its own separate video. Kind of updating the one where I said that perhaps this is a plot hole. It certainly could be, but at the same time you can argue maybe it's not. Either way, this all suggests that he was already working on Cell well before the arc in which he collected these cells. At the start of the Cell Saga with Frieza and King Cold, and during the Saiyan Saga with everyone else. Piccolo even mentions that that's why Cell's Kamehameha wasn't very impressive, because he got it from Goku during that 2 arcs previous. Now, with that being said, that leaves the question of, well, when exactly did Gero begin to work on some of these other androids, such as when did he turn himself into one? When did he create 19? Obviously, that came after 17 and 18. But when did he create 17 and 18, and even 16? And any of these, as a matter of fact, the only one we know for a fact was already up and running at the time, because we saw him on screen, was 8. Maybe Major Metallotron was one of them. Maybe he was 9, maybe he was 7. We don't really know. But what we do know is that there are little hints about what exactly Gero was kind of cooking up with regard to the androids. After all, when 17 and 18 emerge and they waken up 16, who again was based on Gero's son, now what does he say? Well, he actually was created from nothing, unlike 17 and 18. He wasn't a human-based android like previous ones, like Android 8 in the past, and thus, as a result, he himself was created basically from scratch. Where they got the flesh, I don't know. I mean, he does seem to bleed at times, but that's neither here nor there. This is where 17 begins to speculate, wait a second, you're not like us then. You weren't based on a human. And then he starts to think, that's strange. If Dr. Gero had the technology to build an artificial human from the ground up, then why did he go back to using human-based types for the two of us? Now this begins a kind of chicken and the egg situation. Is it because the fact that Gero purposely used 17 and 18 and made them into androids, not only so that they could possibly kill Goku, but also so that he could use them to fuel Cell's perfection? Or perhaps did the computer that we see here working on Cell, collecting the cells and so on, use the idea when it was creating the concept of Cell along with Gero of using the already pre-existing 17 and 18? Which came first and which idea came first? I like to often think that Gero kind of had Cell in mind already back then. You know, Gero was kind of a genetic engineer, a genes placer, if you will, somebody who seemed like he was trying to kind of perfect humanity in a sense, try and take it to the next level and create the ultimate life form, almost like David in Prometheus and Alien Covenant. Whereas maybe he created Cell in order to purposely absorb 17 and 18, or maybe he purposely created them to be absorbed by Cell, using them perhaps to kill Goku, and then having them in turn being killed, essentially incorporated into the cells by Cell. It's a pretty kind of messed up way of kind of thinking about it, because that means that Gero always intended for them to die. And, you know, it could also be, again, that maybe after he had created them, he had instead seen that perhaps they were so disobedient, as it explains, no matter what he did, that he was like, well, if they kill me one day, Cell, my real child, my perfect being that I have created, will assimilate them. Not just that, but also when we really begin to think about it too, maybe again, it is a matter of him kind of putting them in place. So again, this is what came first, and it's really hard to tell. However, another thing that this brings up, and I want to discuss in this video, because it's one of the things that prompted it, is what Gero says with regard to these androids. After he wakens them up, what does he say? 18 says, "Oh, good morning, Dr. Gero. I see that you've become an artificial human yourself." And Gero says, "Yes, I greatly desired eternal life." And that's why he became an android himself, a robot with a human brain, his original one, inside of it. Again, I actually discussed a lot of this with Black and Fist in my video, Why the Androids Didn't Obey Dr. Gero, about whether or not Gero truly even is, well, Gero anymore, or if he actually died when the brain was transplanted into him, and he's just a robot who thinks he is. I know that's even more mind-blowing in a sense, especially since we're talking about a brain, right? But with that being said, Gero basically says that he is now immortal as this robot. Kind of like the think tank, let's say, in Fallout New Vegas. He's able to perpetually keep his brain in a state of not decaying, as it would seem, by becoming an android. However, the entire thing that they talk about is that due to the constraints of the time it would take to create the biotechnology of Cell and make him the perfect artificial humanoid, the perfect being, he decided to leave it to his computer. But that's the thing. If Dr. Gero was immortal now, then why did he leave everything up to his computer? If he had all eternity, theoretically, in his mind, to continue the project. It's just said that, well, he did. So it's interesting to think about. Maybe Gero intended, after however long it would take for Cell to be fully created, over 20 years, to finally then in turn forward his plans with this being after everything had been kind of set in the motion. We don't even know when he originally planned to wake up 17 and 18, because the fact that he was using them to eventually kill Goku, but he only woke them up in this timeline, for instance, because he was pushed to the brink of death by the other Z fighters showing up, and he did it as a last-second maneuver. He even says right here, I would have preferred not to activate these two if at all possible, but with the way things are going, I have no other choice. In the future, they killed Gero and escaped, and then they went on their reign of terror and killed everyone there. So it kind of leaves the question open, how long would he have kept them in there? You can argue that maybe they're also immortal, just like Gero, because the fact that he talks about his artificial humans having eternal life. So there's a lot of questions here. When did he start doing it? But I feel like Cell is such a complex concept that he must have started working on him many years before. He must have started working on him before, at least in concept and theory, 17 and 18 were even developed. Maybe before 16, maybe even before any of the others. It is such a complicated idea, and it took so long. And then the anime version, for instance, we see that Gero wasn't an android yet either, which means that it could have been a very long time in the process before he decided to craft Cell and then put him into action. And maybe even he only started to figure out how to truly make him come to life after he had upgraded 17 and 18. And then in turn, kind of brought all of that together in a tapestry of evil. But that's a discussion for another day. So what do you guys think? When do you think that Dr. Gero started to work on Cell? Do you think it was before 17 and 18, afterward? Do you think it was many years before, and thus he created him even before 16, for instance? Maybe 16 was yet another contingency plan and backup to try and defeat Cell, considering just how strong he was, even compared to 17 and 18, to where he theoretically could have even beaten Cell in their fight, which I discussed in another video that you guys can see on my channel and the cards in the top right corner. Let me know in the comments. Additionally, make sure to like this video if you like it. Let me know your thoughts I've already said. Subscribe if you're new here. I think you might enjoy a lot more of my videos. I've been known to be called Cell Saga Media from time to time because that's so much I talk about it. And make sure to stick around because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.